Palmistry is all too often written off as fake, as fraudulent, a bit of fun by fortune telling. It's not real. But what if I could reveal to you specific features in your palms that reveal the signs of a skeptic in palmistry, if you are in fact a skeptic? Stay with me because in this video I'm going to be revealing these 4 signs of a skeptic in palmistry, as well as revealing some of these signs in the famous skeptic's hands, James Randi. So before I begin, I just want to make it clear that a skeptic is not necessarily narrow-minded. There is a difference here, and there's nothing bad about being skeptical. I myself was skeptical about palmistry in the first place, and this is why I began my journey over 20 years ago. So, the first sign I'm going to be talking about is the angle of the thumb. The tip of the thumb here represents willpower, and the second phalange or phalanx represents logic. The angle of the thumb reveals our attitude towards it's essentially our openness, and it's in both sort of personality, as well as essentially how open we are to new concepts. Essentially it's just openness, full stop. Now, if you lay your palm flat, just like this one or this one here, lay it flat on a surface, and if your thumb fails to open, actually this is I've done this on purpose here because there's some good examples here as to openness here, because this thumb opens, it's not quite 90 degrees, but I'd say it's about 80. If it opens quite naturally at sort of like a 45-degree angle, if you can't open it easily when it's sort of flat on against the surface, more than that, that's absolutely a sign of someone who is objective. That's not the right word to use at all. I mean, firstly, it's a sign of self-consideration, someone who is to some degree self-absorbed. I don't want to say selfish, because it's not really fair to judge a person by one sign alone in the hands. But it's certainly an inability, it's kind of closing off, an inability to kind of be open and accept new ideas, new thoughts and thinking, and feeling as well. Essentially, the more naturally narrow this angle here, when the palm is flat against the surface, reveals the more closed off a person is in general. It's not necessarily a sign of, someone who's kind of blinkered or narrow-minded or skeptical, but it certainly reveals that their nature is closed off, that they hold their cards close to their chest. That much, I would say, is true. They are reserved, they are conservative, and these traits are certainly, they tie in with skepticism. And this is partly why I use Donald Trump's hand here, because his thumb angle is very naturally closed off. He himself is sort of closed off. He's very conservative, and he's perhaps not kind of open or revealing his true self. At least it's a potential sign of these things, and this is what palmistry is. It's connecting the circumstantial clues together to form an accurate diagnosis. It's a guidance tool. So the second sign I'm going to be revealing here is the lifeline. This is a major palmar line, and the headline. Now the formation of these two lines, not everyone has this, but if your lifeline and headline are joined, this is one of the signs of a skeptic, because the longer these two are joined for, the more cautious, the more by the book, the more conformist, and the more conservative. Again, it's that another sign of someone who's unwilling to take risks and jump in, using kind of impulsive, intuitive, abstract thinking. It's someone who's a lot more cautious and slow to make decisions the longer these two lines are attached for. So Donald Trump, not a great example here, because I would say that these two aren't attached for all that long. However, this this is a good example here. This is certainly someone who is very cautious, who's very unwilling um, to think radically, in a non-conformist way. These two don't separate until they reach the first and second fingers. So this is certainly someone who is remarkably cautious, um, and conservative. And the good news is here that their decisions are entirely grounded with their physical world, their environment. Their the decisions are attached to their world in a very physical sense. They are very likely to stick to plans and structure and routine and order. And this is also because this person is very square palmed, very short fingers. Um, and because of this kind of lack of openness as well, it means that they gain a sense of security from structure, from order and routine. And they probably have a very strong sense of order that's very rooted in what they can touch and feel, the practical material, the grounded. They don't have any time for theory, hypothesis. Deep philosophical thinking is not their game, and that's why it's very commonly seen, these signs of a skeptic, in those with square palms and short fingers. Essentially, they're very practical. They're rooted in they gravitate towards all the worldly and earthly and material things. This is what makes sense to them. So you're much more likely to see these signs of a skeptic in earth hands. And that is to say, square palm, short fingers. Donald Trump pretty much fits the bill here. His fingers, I wouldn't say, are massively short, but they aren't long either. And the palm is certainly square. And other features, as I've already mentioned here, do kind of tally up. But the second thing I want to mention here is the space between the headline and the heart line. So when we see a space here that is very narrow, and this is, in fact, in this hand, it's actually not all that narrow. It's probably more narrow in Donald Trump's hand. Yeah, kind of marginal. It's not incredibly wide either. And this is just palmistry. Everything has to be done in a very sort of measured approach, and it is interpretation. It's subjective. And it has to be done, very kind of holistically. You've got to look at everything. I would say that this person is um, neither has a large space nor a narrow one either between the head and heart line. And this is my third sign here. So if the space between these two is a centimeter or less, I would say that makes someone having it creates a more how can I put this? It creates a further inability to be open to new thinking, and as well as that feeling as well. It's similar to what we see about the angle of the thumb as well, and it compounds this. If we see a very narrow space between the two, um, at any point, and certainly throughout, then this again, it enhances this inability to be open to both thought and feeling. Essentially, the more reduced the space here, the more blinkered, the more narrow-minded, the more skeptical. So it's entirely possible to be skeptical and be open-minded. I just want to make that clear, because I'm not trying to make out as though it's bad to be skeptical. It's healthy, certainly to some degree. Um, if you're too open, then you're going to be naive, and if you're too closed off, you're going to miss out on opportunities. And what I love about James Randi's hands here is that the space between his headline and heartline is actually very wide. So, whilst he is very cautious, very rational, very logical, he is also open-minded, and it shows essentially scientific thinking. So that's what this kind of narrow space here shows us, is that the more narrow this gap, the less scientific thinking, the less able to think in those scientific terms, to be open to criticism and challenge of accepted ideas, and to change and challenge those ongoing theories. Earth hands quite often have a fairly narrow space here because they stick to what they know, and that for them, they don't want challenge, they don't want change, because these things are unsettling, because they're not rooted in structure and routine and order. Now, my fourth sign here is the headline's trajectory, the direction, the course of the headline, and where it ends, and the arc of it, the shape of it, the curvature. This speaks for our rationality. As well as I've mentioned, the second phalanx of the thumb as well. The longer this is, the greater the capacity for ideas and logical thinking. The length of the headline, I don't think this has all that much bearing on um, skepticism or rationality, but it's more about the straightness of it, and where it's heading. So for Donald Trump, it heads towards a powerful imagination. He's certainly got, it got the ability to kind of conjure things up, um, but it's fairly straight, which shows that he is quite logical at the same time. So he's actually fairly measured in this respect. He's able to be quite imaginative, but at the same time, he's fairly rational. So you probably won't see all four signs in any one person's hand, and this person certainly has, their headline here. Notice the curvature of it. There's a gentle sort of curve to it, and it heads towards the lunar mount, the place of imagination and abstract subconscious thinking, unconscious thinking, and this mount itself is well developed. Um, so this is essentially is a sign of creativity. And because this person is much more rooted to the physical and the practical, they are physically and practically creative. They create with their hands. There's a strong sense of this, and that's also denoted by the kind of bulbous nature of particularly the tip of the ring finger, but let's not get into that. This person as well, their headline is dipping. It takes a complete shift towards lunar as well. It's straight for a while, but then it takes a shift. So there's essentially a shift in their own perspectives rather, into something that's much more abstract. So, what do we see in James Randi's hands, and how do my four signs of a skeptic relate here? How do they corroborate? Are they relevant? Well, he's something of an anomaly in a way, because his hands are certainly not the classical kind of earth hands. They are square. In fact, I mean, this image isn't very accurate, because the hand itself is almost sort of um, cupped. He's doing this with his hands. It's not like the best kind of image. And also the thumb as well is kind of poking outwards, but it's still not able to create this 90-degree angle. I don't think in any of the images that I've seen it's really all that possible for him. If he laid his hand flat, or in fact created a palm print, this thumb angle would always be fairly narrow, not 45 degrees narrow, but certainly he had an inability to accept notions without challenging it. He wasn't able to receive openly information without there being some um, without creating some sort of obstacle. It's an inability to accept, uh, and that is in part what that means. Essentially, that angle of the thumb is a lot of it is about acceptance, and the more willing we are to accept and embrace and be open, And the more narrow this angle, well, the less able we are to accept. James Randi wasn't an earth hand. He didn't have square palm and short fingers. He had a square palm and, I would say, relatively long fingers, or at least they're not short anyway. You get the sense here, the fingers. It's kind of in the middle here. They're not short. If you measure the longest finger against the entire length of the palm, it'd probably come up to 7/8 of the palm's length, although this is not exactly an accurate way of doing it here using this image. Essentially, he was an air hand. He was much better with his head than his hands. He was far more able to process thoughts and thinking and slow down the information that came in and really break this down and analyze. And that's what the length of the fingers reveals to us. The longer the fingers, the more of a thinker, essentially, the slower the thought process is, the more kind of analytical, the more of a thinker a person, someone is, the longer the fingers are. Also, I think it's important to notice just the thickness of the fingers as well. On a side note, the chunkier the fingers, the more blunt, shall we say, the more or the less able to put up with nonsense. And this, you always see this with really chunky fingers. Alan Sugar kind of springs to mind. Rupert Murdoch, kind of brutal, firm but fair type leaders always have this. They kind of cut to the chase, they get to the nonsense, and they root it out. And that certainly sums up James Randi. And also the length of the headline, or the straightness and the length as a combination, reveals that kind of bluntness as well, that approach towards just sort of saying what you see as well. But certainly the trajectory of the headline here is not rooted in the abstract. It's not creative. It's not subconscious. It's not dreams. It's not imagination. It's rational. It's logical. This headline here, the straightness of it, and I can appreciate it's not easy to see, but if you bear with me, you can just about make out that it is, in fact, very straight, and it kind of, it's almost sort of horizontal. And this was known in Roman palmistry as the table line. Essentially, emperors would look for this in their soldiers as a sign that someone was able to shoulder many responsibilities, that they were very rational, that they were um, tactical and strategic in their thinking. Anyone who has a headline, and it's not really possible to see here, a headline that reaches outer Mars here, which is just sort of above the lunar mount, if it reaches just below the heart line here, it's absolutely someone who is very able to plan, to strategize, to think ahead, um, and would succeed in military tactical thinking. And that's essentially what this shows. It's someone who's very rational, very logical. And what's interesting is that generally when you see this, when you see someone who has a headline that kind of reaches up towards outer Mars, it closes off the gap between the heart and the headline. It makes them less able to be more open. The more rational you are, the less irrational, I suppose, you are. The less abstract of a thinker, the less of a radical nonconformist thinker you might well be. But in James Randi's case, interestingly, he has inherently, because we're looking at the left hand here, he's very open-minded. So he's very able to challenge even not just other ideas and notions, but himself as well. So in a way, I find him a bit of a walking contradiction, because the inability to be open by the sheer angle of the thumb here, it kind of negates what I've just mentioned about the openness here as well. So I think that he was a closed book. I think that emotionally speaking, certainly he was very closed off. He was very, very cautious about accepting ideas and even other people as well. Um, but at the same time, he was very open-minded and very much in his own thoughts. Very deep thinker, very philosophical, and absolutely took a very kind of no-nonsense approach about, um, well, everything really. And as well as this, you can clearly see that the head and the lifeline are joined for a significant amount of time. He was immensely cautious, immensely by the book. This is the sort of person who wouldn't do anything without making sure it was peer reviewed, making sure he had recommendations from those he trusted and he did not trust easily. This was absolutely, a very, very cautious person, someone who did things in their own way in their own time, and that time was probably quite slow. They made decisions very, very slowly. They weighed things up in a very measured, rational, and logical way. The space between the headline and the heartline on the right hand appears more narrow, but I'm just going to kind of put this down to the angle of the hand. It's not always possible to really judge from especially one image alone, and I don't really have very many good images of his hands. It's very difficult. And the left hand represents much more what is inherent and genetic and internal, and the right hand is much more developed. So if in fact this space on the right hand is more narrow than on the left, and that shows he's become more, I suppose, narrow-minded over time, more um, skeptical over time. It shows a development in skeptical thinking, if that is the case, and that is quite possible. So James Randi has, in my opinion, three of the signs of my four signs of a skeptic in palmistry. How many signs do you have if you are a skeptic, self-proclaimed or otherwise? I'd like to know. Please do comment below. So, very recently I made the mistake of debating, actually with another palm reader, about the validity of prediction by palmistry. I made the mistake because actually there's no point in debating. There's no point in fighting against other people's beliefs. It's their belief. It's personal. It's a choice. Belief is a choice. And that's the neat thing about it. We all have our right to our own beliefs. No one should be trying to change how we think and feel. We should only be challenging ourselves. And that's partly why I created this video, so that I'm providing an opportunity for others to kind of challenge their own potentially unfounded preconceptions around palmistry, which has massive stigmas attached to it. Most people believe, without requiring any real evidence, that palmistry is fake, that it is fraudulent. And in this debate that I had with this person, they said, well, because the lines change, um, it means that it's not really possible to predict by palmistry. We can't predict people's futures if our lines are changing. It's just not viable, and anyone who does this is fraudulent. And my argument to that is quite simply this. We get our weather report. We know that it is not 100% foolproof. We know it's a guidance tool in the same way that the palms reveal information. The weather is not reliable because our current circumstances, pressure might change, and it might change that forecast ahead of us. It might not in fact be sunny in 4 days' time. And it's very, very similar to palmistry. Should we rule out the weather report and say that it is fraudulent just because it is not 100% reliable, just because current circumstances might change potential future outcomes? No. No one looks at the weather report and says that's fraudulent, that's fake, because information changes in the current. So essentially, it's important not to hang on to prediction, but at the same time, it's also important not to completely rule out possibilities. And I believe it is possible to make prediction by palmistry, but things have to be weighed up. The world of palmistry is a minefield, and there certainly is a great deal of misinformation out there which doesn't help, and there certainly are fakes and frauds out there which also don't help. Doesn't take a lot to muddy these waters. But if you come across one bad doctor, it doesn't mean that all of medical science is a load of nonsense. And the way in which I work, it's not possible to cold read from a photograph. I have, in fact, created a playlist of around about 100 videos where people sent me emails of their palms and told me very little, often nothing about their lives, and I would reveal their lives in a video form, which is open for all to see without obviously revealing any of their personal or confidential information. Please do let me know your thoughts on this video. I would love to know if you have looked at your own hand whilst watching this, and maybe you're still very skeptical. Maybe you still feel this is all too subjective, that there isn't enough evidence. Maybe you've challenged and changed your own opinion somewhat. Let me know what your thoughts are. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.